By 279 BC, Scythia was comprised of several major clans which were subordinate to the ruling Sarvan and the clan that held that office, in this instance being held by the Agarid clan. The other influential clans included the Sake, Datanpur, Vaida, and finally the Gang, who were once the ruling clan of Sarmatia before that land's conquest at the hands of the Bosporan Greeks. All of these clans were ethnically Scythian and operated in a semi-nomadic fashion. 4 of the tribes would be on the steppe, pasturing the herds and protecting Scythian territory, while 1 of them would remain stationary, residing near the seat of the Sarvan's power in Tafros. Such a duty would pass from one clan to another on a revolving basis, and this stationary clan would extract tribute from sedentary subjects, such as gold or grain or slaves, as well as keep them in line, and directly participate in the Sarvan's court, advising him on matters of great concern to Scythia. A further division existed between the major clans, which participated in this system as a kind of aristocracy, and the minor clans, who were innumerable. The minor clans sometimes pledged to join major clans on their nomadic journeys, but often went on shorter journeys alone with their smaller flocks, or in many cases weren't able to participate in the system at all, settling in towns and villages, and in this case, cities, like Olbia. As it stood in 279, the stationary clan was the Datanpur, and the major subject was Olbia, an ethnically Greek port city that was the jewel amongst Scythia's subjects. Of course, the Greeks were frothing with rage at their subjugation, but furthermore, they were being crowded out by lesser clansmen moving into the city and being given priority to settle and work there. Revolt was brewing just beneath the surface, but this did not worry Sarvan Anacharsis, who was caught up with his settlement of the north and the rearing of his son, Rathnakuda Agarid. Their family life was truly idyllic, with 2 daughters named Arjune and Kanka in addition to his son, his noble heir. The royal complex at Tafros was largely decorated under the command of his wife, Eardhyame, who painstakingly designed repeating patterns of flowers and stags to be inlaid into the great cedar beams and heavy wooden steps that opened into the courtyard, with the banners of the major clans fluttering gently in the breeze. They even kept bees, and the honey thereof was distributed to any who came to the gates to ask of it. They loved their people, and were loved by them. To the east, the Dahe, cousins in the Scythian culture, won 2 great wars against Parthia and Bactria, claiming a vast yet thinly populated realm. Only time would tell if it would last, and whether they were fated to be friend or foe. In 278, the clan chief of the Datanpur, Uday Datanpur, was assassinated by a Greek woman in his tent, and the treacherous plot of the Olbian Greeks was finally revealed. Supported handsomely by the neighboring Bosporans, they revolted under the flag of Tyrus, aiming for their independence from royal Scythia, marking the date of the first Hellenic revolt. All the clans rallied, cutting short their nomadic grazing in the middle of August to engage in the holy rite of warfare. Eardhyame painted her husband with the blood of a white horse, and Anacharsis breathed deeply of the holy incense while he looked upon his son, the carrier of his legacy. Stoic, his skin wet with the blood of a horse and the tears of his wife, he emerged from his royal complex and led a charge west against the upstart Greeks, thousands of hooves shaking the earth in their multitudes, cleaving a path in the road that would stand as a permanent artery for travel between Olbia and Tafros forever, called the Jara Sana, or the Road of Power. He arrived at the city of Olbia in only a few days' time, when him and his army, consisting of the bulk of both the Agarid and Datanpur clans, found themselves under fire from the walls of the city, which was unwilling to allow the Sarvan and his men to establish the foothold of siege there. The Greeks upon the fortifications of their city sacrificed goats and calves to their gods, the black smoke wafting from the walls and billowing from the city as though it were already in flames. As such, Anacharsis kept his men mobile, setting up camp out of range of their fire, harassing the city day and night with flaming arrows, slings, and even loud instruments, like horns and drums, to deny the inhabitants of Olbia any sleep whatsoever. The Scythian men were divided into shifts of sleep and offense, so the noise would be unceasing so long as the Greeks lived. Roughly a week in, Scythian ships attempted to break the siege from the Olbians' open port, but the Scythian ships were decimated by the Greeks, who were a distinctly more maritime people. 2 weeks into the siege, however, the strategy of the Scythian attackers shifted in a subtle way. The defenders were harried and exhausted, and so in addition to the sensory harassment, Anacharsis began sending teams of 4 or 5 men to scale the walls. Sometimes they'd be caught right away, often they'd be caught after killing a dozen or so men, but all it took was one to get through and open the gates. Week 3 of the siege, amidst the roaring cacophony of the shouts and the horns and the timbrels and the horses, beneath the deep, starry sky, the smoke from sacrifices having long stopped obscuring the abyssal view of the heavens, the main gates rumbled open, and the Scythians came flooding in. The Greeks had thousands of men protecting the city, but it wasn't enough, as they were trampled by uncountable steeds, and the foundation of the city itself was unsettled. However, with their blade to the jugular of the enemy, with the opportunity to completely depopulate the city of Greeks, Anacharsis decided to have mercy. He killed the relevant leaders, which still implicated over 100 men, but left the common folk to live and worship and trade as they had. Within the month, Tyrus was completely subsumed back into Scythia, and Anacharsis was joyous to return home to his wife, to his son, and to the wildflower honey his daughter Kanka would have waiting for him. On the 12th of September, just as the autumn chill could be smelled in the air, Sarvan Anacharsis smelled something else. Smoke. Not the fragrant, sweet smoke of a sacrifice. No. It was bitter. Like the smell of burning timbers, of paints and dyes blistering beneath a wrathful flame. He rushed ahead, panicked, as though the gods had already whispered the answer to his heart. He was the first to arrive to his royal complex in Tafros, or rather, what was left of it. The mighty timbers which made up its supports were reduced to charcoal, the marble lions beheaded, the banners of the clans torn and scattered. The rest of his army found him tearing through the rubble, face smeared with ashes up to the elbows in soot, cuts and splinters speckling his body with blood as he lifted a mighty beam and found the body of his wife, the lovely, fair Eardiame, half blackened in the dust, his 2 daughters beside her, and his wailing infant son Nakarada, his face gored across the cheek and his little head scarred by the flames. He cradled his whole family in his great arms, holding their cold bodies to his chest, heaving with grief, while royal nurses cared for the boy's wounds. He looked about his court and found a terrible truth. The flag of the Gank clan was gone. In the coming days, he would receive information that the Ganks had betrayed him, betrayed his hospitality, and taken a dishonorable deal from the Bosporan Greeks. Destroy the Scythians, and Sarmatia will rule anew in their stead. Bosporan soldiers were streaming in from the east to help the Ganks with their overthrow of Royal Scythia, and the distraction that was the First Hellenic Revolt was revealed to be the opening blow to the First Greco-Scythian War. The Bosporans didn't just have the traitors of the Gank family on their side, however. They brought friends, like the Heniokians, and even distant Epirus, which profited from their supply of goods to the Bosporan. As a first order of business, Sarvan Anacharsis retracted his mercy and ordered Olbia be put to the sword, the Greeks replaced entirely by Scythians of the minor clans. Thousands of Greeks were affixed to torture poles along the Jana Sinag, and legend says their wailing could be heard for miles all around. The ruling basileus of the Bosporan kingdom, Spartacus III, sent a capitulation demand to Anacharsis, who sent it back in a chest full of Greek hands, the reply reading, "You should have kept these to yourselves." In 277, Anacharsis conducted a major sacrifice to the Scythian god of war, Thagamasadas, inside of Bosporan territory, before conquering all land north of the Tanais River. The Bosporans were concentrated in the south, making devastating gains in Crimea, aided by the Gank clan. The strategy of the invaders and the traders reflected a distinct mixing of styles. Namely, the phalanx strategy of the Greeks made for a kind of infantry resistant to cavalry charges, but left vulnerable to horse archers, while the Scythian style was replicated in the gank tactics, consisting of highly mobile mounted men utilizing charges and projectile barrages to win the day. One particularly brutal day was witnessed near the end of that year with the Battle of Urvel in the north on the Bosporan side of the Tanais River. A great army was marching into Scythian territory in the hopes of finding some great city or fortress to besiege, but finding none. All the while, men on horseback taunted them from their steeds, picking off the Greeks one by one, until an open confrontation finally materialized. The Greeks formed up in their phalanx formation, bristling with long spears, but this did not protect them from being peppered with arrows, and certainly didn't prevent them from being flanked by cavalry with thick, gruesome spears, couched firm, charging into their ranks. It was a slaughter, and the Greek general was blinded and bound to the back of a horse, dragged all the way back to the Bosporan forward encampment, where he died. The war was brutal like this for all of its breadth, years passing where Greek blood beat in flowing streams, and years where Scythian blood beat like rivers. The Bosporans, for want of cities to burn, used the traitorous gank horsemen to harass minor clans and lure them into open encounters with the Bosporans, who could only go on occupying shimmering fields of grasses for so long before losing their resolve. The two powers continued to savage each other, the Bosporan capital of Pantikapaon falling in 276, while Bosporan men claimed most of Crimea and almost all of eastern Scythia, setting wildfires and salting the grazing pastures necessary to the Scythian steppe horse, the root of its power. Meanwhile, abroad, Armenia claimed a great victory over the Kingdom of Pontus, and Emporia claimed a great victory over Massilia. In 275, the Bosporans captured Tafros, and relegated the Scythians to the steppe, and of course, to the parts of their own territory which was being occupied by the horse lords. However, the fate of history was decided in 274, with the final united push of the Scythians. The major clans made a swarming push deep into Bosporan territory, ignoring all of its cities and fortresses, instead positively ravaging the countryside, setting their fields alight and piling the bodies of farmers in stacks 20 feet high. It was said that travel between cities, let alone trade, was completely impossible. This struck the land with a great and terrible famine, and forced Spartacus III to the negotiating table. Ultimately, the Scythians carved the provinces of Taurica, Alania, and Confluentia to Scythia, vacating the Greeks from Crimea, and giving the Scythians a commanding monopoly on the north and the east, and therefore a monopoly on the settlement of the wild steppe in these directions as well. As for Arjuna Gank, who betrayed royal Scythia, he was personally scalped, beheaded, and his corpse placed upside down upon a torture pole by Anacharsis Agorid, who threshed out the flesh and hair from the scalp, tanned it, and tattooed a poem upon it, which would come to hang on the wall behind the throne at Tafros for as long as those walls stood. The poem read, "A cousin paid, one of my blood, a sorrow stained by ash and mud, a king alone who drank of hate, a betrayer's head, his death his fate, a man, a son, a mourning lord. Let thy oath be true, or besides, the sword." The First Greco-Scythian War was by all accounts a great victory. But this was a cold comfort for Anacharsis, who was never the same. It was said that he would wander around his royal complex, rebuilt in the old style, wailing through all the hours of the night. He slept little, and terrified the servants as his countenance went from one which was warm and affable to one that was haunted and wrathful. Even so, for the rest of his life he ruled over a golden age. Several Greek cities were brought into the fold and made subjects of royal Scythia, including Pantikapaon, Theodosia, and Charax, all wealthy, coastal trading hubs that would fuel the age of prosperity that would define the latter half of the Sarvan's lonely, legendary days. In November of 273, the Etruscan kingdom of Etruria staged their final conquest of Rome, overcoming them and establishing the Empire of Tuscia, the greatest power in all Italy. A truly ancient people, only time would tell what the Etruscans would do with their newfound dominion. Santonia also continued their campaign of conquest, becoming by far the most powerful of all the Gauls, or indeed, even all the barbaric peoples of wild Europe. Indeed, their high chief, Vertiscus, even sent a letter to the new emperor of Tuscia, congratulating Carcuna Clute on his achievement and referring to him as a brother under the gods. The Etruscans did not take kindly to this, and left his letter without a dignified response. Despite all of their posturing, however, the freshly dubbed Empire of Tuscia lost a major war to their southern neighbor Lucania in 269 BC. In 265, due to the common threat of the Bosporan Kingdom, which since the war had colonized east to the shores of the Caspian Sea, Scythia and Armenia forged a strong alliance, bolstered by the personal friendship of Sarvan Anacharsis and King Orontes III. This alliance would essentially grant the two total dominance over the Black Sea and completely alter the balance of power in the region, making King Spartacus fear for his life. Then, on the 10th of May 263, Sarvan Anacharsis Agarid died at the age of 55, a heart surely burdened by mourning, having given out early. His legacy, however, would be everlasting on the hearts of his people. His son, Nakarada Agarid, just barely old enough to rule at the age of 16, proved his worth by single-handedly building his father's funeral pyre and setting it alight with a javelin from a great distance. This boy, with a youthful determination that shines defiantly from a face gruesomely disfigured, stands ready to seize history and take from it what he so desires. That is his fate. Unbounded, Nakarada rides determined to bring his people to ever greater glory, and to avenge the sorrows of his noble father and the anguish of his gentle mother and the sisters he never got to know. Nakarada will etch his name in the earth itself, and the sound of it will command a fearful bow from the city dwellers, from horizon to horizon.